Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Nick and I discuss making career changes in your 30s. We talk to Larry O'Neill about oceanography, heat domes, and getting stranded at sea. Okay, and finally, bear with me on this, and finally, because Nick is getting me on this one. A cumulonimbus cloud weighs approximately 1 million pounds. In order to calculate this, scientists had to determine how dense and then how big the clouds could get. It turns out that there is approximately a half gram of water per cubic meter in a cloud, or the equivalent of a marble in a box that is big enough to fit you and a friend. And the average cumulonimbus is about 1 cubic kilometer, which works out to be 500 million grams of water, or 1.1 million pounds. That is something.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Hit that music.
Okay, today is Environmental Professionals Day. Yeah! Environmental Professionals Day was established worldwide on April 15th, 2020 to recognize the crucial work that environmental professionals do every day to create a more just and sustainable world for all living beings. This year, Environmental Professionals Day is endorsed by a consortium of organizations including NAEP and the International Association for Impact Assessment.
And some others, I think.
And yeah, lots more. I mean, more to come. And there should be lots of fun media posts out today that you can check out on all of our NAEP profiles. So if you're interested in supporting Environmental Professionals Day, we ask that you show your thanks virtually. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can share the work of someone you know on social media and tag them using hashtag Environmental Professionals Day, hashtag Thank You EPs, or hashtag EP Day 2022. You could share a short bio of someone you know who works to protect our environment and tag it with those same 3 tags. And last but not least, you could share an article written by or about an environmental professional and tag them as well. Super cool stuff. Really, really excited that we get to participate in this day. And again, thank you to all of those environmental professionals for all the work that you do. It's often, overlooked, but it's great work and it's absolutely vital for us to live and be and breathe good, clean air and good, clean water, all that fun stuff. So thank you, everybody. And I need to stop talking now.
I'm going to lower the curtain on you now. And,
I know. Jeez,
check out more on www.naep.org. We look forward to seeing your posts.
As always, we appreciate all of our awesome sponsors, and they are what keep the show going. If you'd like to sponsor the show, please head on over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out our sponsor form for details. Let's get to our segment.
Yeah, we did also. So Kaylee asked me if we could talk about career changes in your 30s.
Okay.
She's like, everything that you've been talking. She's like, I love what you're talking about. Maybe she said this to you too, but a lot of it is geared towards recent new hires. And I told her, I was like, a lot of it is still the same. You still have to network. You still have to fill your res. It's like,
yeah.
Everyone thinks that their situation is unique. That's not for me. What do I do? I'm in my 30s, years old.
I'm in my 30s. Okay, this is good. It's a good advice for people who want to change career in their 30s, like Nick, like if I wanted to, for example.
Yeah. So if Nick was like, I'm sick of this, I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would I do? I mean, I would call my friends.
Okay, phone a friend. I like that.
That was the first thing I would do. I mean, it just depends, I guess, on what what you would be interested in. Like how big a career shift are we talking? Am I just wanting a different company, or do I want to become a meteorologist or something? Then it's totally different. And I feel like that's a scarier one to reset on when you're in your 30s, is like a complete career change, not just sort of a shift from left to right. But, I don't know. I think of it in my mind, there's these are stages of your life, right? There's different things that you do for a certain amount of time and then you do something else. And that happens even if you stay at the same company. You don't tend to do the same thing for 30 years. So that's really the frame of mind that I would put myself in. It's like, okay, like right now, for example, I am in basically a business development, marketing, and management role. So I have a lot of different hats. I do a lot of different things. And ultimately, I'm judged on my performance, getting work for people so that we can keep doing what we've been doing. And that's new-ish for me, but is more what I wanted to be doing in the first place, right? So I made a shift in my 30s from one company to another to follow that path, where I get to meet people and make connections and do all of this stuff that is fun and interesting for me that I couldn't do previously. So that's just part of the reason I switched jobs in general. To do that, I talk to people who are interested in letting me do that. And, I have a network of people that I know. And, I've tried to maintain contacts in different industries in general for that reason, but also because I just like catching up with old friends. And that is how I got this job. So, and it's been great for me. I really enjoyed it. So, but now that I've talked to you for 2 minutes, what do you think of what I just said?
Well, I think the first thing that makes sense is you said your frame of mind. I think that's the very first thing. Anybody who's changing their career, regardless of whether you're a student and you decide to change the degree you're going after, I know that causes people a lot of anxiety. If you are in your 30s and you already were trying a couple of things and that you're not finding that you're fulfilled or satisfied, a lot of people revert to the exact same thing. Like, I'm feeling like I'm failing or something's not going right. But if you listen to all of our guests, that's pretty much normal.
Yeah.
You try some things, you figure out what you like, what you don't like. And I think that's what needs to happen is you're paying attention to what you like and don't like. And then you're looking at, okay, these are the directions or direction that I'd like to go. And then if you don't have a network, I mean, you went to school, so you know somebody, or maybe you didn't. I don't know. So whether you have a network or not, you want to either start building one or start leaning on what you already have. So all the things you said were applicable, Nick.
Hey, look at that.
I think a lot of people don't have an underlying network. So maybe they're not as outgoing as you and holding on to talking to people and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I think we've touched on this before, but I think a lot of how we perceive the world is the stories we tell ourselves. So if you're telling yourself, I'm 30 and I'm washed up and I'm never going to find a job, that's the story you're living, and you will manifest that. Mm-hmm. If you tell yourself, I'm 30 and I'm reinventing myself and this is exciting times and it's an opportunity for me to find something new, you're going to come across that way in an interview. You're going to be more positive about what you're looking at. So a lot of it is just setting your frame of mind, which sets your frame of reference, and then will lead to more and better opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's one of those things you say, some people probably aren't as outgoing as I am, right? Like, which is true to a degree. And I think, but there's also ways that you can almost, I don't want to say force yourself, but you can kind of put yourself in a situation where you have to be a little outgoing, right? And sometimes that's joining an organization. It's why I joined NAEP, for example. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, I need to meet people that are in this field that do what I do. So I might as well join an organization. But it shouldn't stop there. And I think that's a lot of times like, oh, I'm in the organization. I made it. I did it. I'm in it. So, I don't have to do anything else now. Right. But, I decided to be part of the board and get involved in the leadership of NAEP because I wanted to meet people. And you don't meet people by just sitting, watching a webinar by yourself in a room. Like, you have to be engaged. So find a way to do that. Be a part of an organization and literally be part of it. Like,
yeah, right. I wonder who would be looking for volunteers in this space. I mean, I don't
know. Exactly.
Begging over here for volunteers. Hello.
Oh, hello. Yeah.
How do I meet people? It's so hard. It's not hard. It's so not hard. But you know what happens? People tell themselves the story. I'm an introvert. That's a story. That's total made up garbage. Yeah. I don't care how many quizzes you took. That is a story that either someone has fed you or you're continuing to tell yourself. Yeah. And you can turn that around and say, I used to be shy. I used to be someone who didn't like to talk, but I have made purposeful efforts to outgrow that or to force myself, and then tell yourself a new story.
But the thing that frustrates me about introvert and extrovert is that people are dynamic. They are not black and white, right? Every single person has had a moment where they are just the funnest person in the room. It happens. Yeah. You can be engaging and outgoing and all of these charming things in certain situations and scenarios. Maybe that's only with your family or only with people you trust, but you can do it. And there's tangible evidence in your life that you have done it. Everybody has a story,
Yeah.
So stop it with that. Like that. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And I don't want to offend all the 75% of our listeners who are going to think, but I am an introvert. I so am.
Yeah.
I just encourage you to think about every time you say that and rewrite that story, because it is something you're just telling yourself, which is holding you back.
Right.
And creating your reality.
Yeah. And for me, like, honestly, I struggled with that. It sounds silly to say now because it's just, I've been able to get through it. But like, I had to change my mindset from I'm an introvert to I have a battery and that battery runs out. Now,
right.
I've found a way to increase capacity. I can go a lot longer, a lot more social than I ever could when I was younger. But that's practice and, kind of getting to know myself a little bit. That's what your 30s are for, right?
Like you said, getting in the right space with the right people. I'm going to be a total introvert if I'm in a room with a certain type of politically stanced persons.
Right.
But if I'm in a room full of other environmental professionals who all love to travel, all love craft beer, all have very similar interests, I find myself very comfortable. So, your level of comfort plays a big part in that as well.
Yeah, it does. It's like, I remember going to NAEP conferences, like, I'm going to do the same thing this year. Every time I start going, I just get a big smile on my face because there's so many people I'm really excited to see again. And that's how you know that you're in the right space. You're excited to do the social thing. And that's really cool.
Yeah. So the other thing, so sort of the third thing that I find most people who are trying to make a transition later in life. 30s, I know. So much later in life. Late. But I've had people tell me like, oh, I'm 40 something. And I'm like, yeah, me too. Like, again, it's your story. If your story says you're 40 something and washed up, that's not my story. I'm 40 and just getting started. So the other thing, though, that people seem to struggle with, and it makes sense, is the skills gap. So I've worked for 6 years and I've only gotten as far as doing marketing, but my degree is in conservation habitat, something, and I haven't touched anything that has to do with that. And now I want to get back into it. And that is a real challenge. And I think but it's the same advice for younger people. You got to start volunteering. You start exploring. You still have to find a way to gain that experience. And that might be taking some more classes. That might be watching some webinars, join NAEP and tune into webinars, get credit for these things. And then you can, at least in your cover letter, talk about that you are trying to pick that stuff up and that you are making intentional efforts to fill those gaps. And that, if someone's looking to hire and they need someone tomorrow, they may be willing to overlook that. Yeah.
And like, your narrative can't be like, well, this was my degree, so I stopped doing it. Now I want to get back into it, but I haven't done anything to prove that I want to get back into it. Like, it can't be like, well, I just hope you'll hire me based on my degree. It's got to be like, look, hey, I did this thing. Like, for me, like, I went in and there was a recession. I took a job that was not related to my field. For me, it ended up being exactly what I wanted to do. And I wish I had known that it existed before. But if it wasn't what I wanted to do, then I'd have to find a way to do that more wildlife biology thing. Go find ways to volunteer and then say to the person that you're trying to hire, hey, look, I love doing this. I have volunteered, I have interned, I have done all of these XYZ things because I'm trying to prove to you how much I care about this. And that's a much better story than like, well, I just kind of want to, use my degree.
Right. I wasted all that money and I want to get back to it. Yeah. All good points. So I think that covers it. It's really the three main things: is your mindset, getting out there and networking, and start filling those gaps.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, let's get to our interview then.
All right. Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Larry O'Neill, Associate Professor with Oregon State University and the Oregon Climate Service, on the show. Larry is a true scientist working on things like air-sea interactions, satellite meteorology, and oceanography, atmospheric boundary layer, and ocean mixed layer dynamics. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you here today. Why don't you start off telling us a little bit about your work and what a climate scientist does?
Yes. So basically, a lot of my research has to do with looking at how the ocean affects the weather and how the weather affects the ocean. And it's something that's, you wouldn't necessarily think that there's a big relationship with, but it's actually quite important for describing how our climate is. So you think about, just the state of Oregon or the US West, some of the big events that influence our livelihoods. So things like droughts, floods, heat waves, like the heat dome we had last summer. and, snowpack, stream flows, all those things. And that's affected by the weather. And it turns out that our weather is really affected by things that happen way out in the middle of the ocean that you might not think that we care about. So especially things like the tropics in the ocean. So you think like palm trees and Mai Tais and all that. Mm-hmm. And the ocean currents and temperatures and things like that there can actually have a big effect on our weather. And so one of my big research focuses is looking at how the ocean kind of affects the weather and how we can observe it. So our observing systems, like we use satellites, buoys, sometimes we go out on ships, things like that. And that's basically how kind of the broad stroke of what we do. Okay. And some of my work with the Oregon Climate Service and as a state climatologist is actually looking at how weather events can impact a variety, basically society and a variety of things within society. So agricultural production, livestock production, flood risk management, the effects of heat on workers and the ecosystem, the natural systems, fish, all those sort of things. And so it kind of keeps us busy because the last few years have been really impactful. We've seen some really impactful events.
That's really awesome. I think, we think about the environment, we think about the stuff we can touch, like the ocean and the land, but the atmosphere and our weather and climate is directly related. So that's really interesting. And you have a PhD in oceanography from Oregon State University and a bachelor's in atmospheric sciences from the University of California at Davis. When did you first get interested in weather and what drove you to it?
Yeah, so I actually grew up was born in the Midwest in South Dakota. And in that state, we had a lot of different weather, like lots of different types of weather, almost everything except tropical cyclones and things like that. And so it really fascinated me. And the weather would change very quickly. It would be 70 degrees one day, and then the next day it would be 20 degrees and snowing. And that would happen actually quite often. And so that sort of thing just infinitely fascinated me about how things could change so much. We also had great thunderstorms, tornadoes, hailstorms, all that stuff. And so that really kind of seeded my interest in weather. And, instead of watching cartoons when I was a kid, I would like to watch the Weather Channel. And that was much to the chagrin of my brother and sister. I'd have the Weather Channel on and looking at the whatever else was going on. Yeah. So just from an early age, I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I went through the process of, taking the classes I need to, whatever. And, I got into undergrad. And at that point, you have to start to figure out, you can't just, broadly study the weather. You have to kind of start to specialize in something. Sure. And so I didn't know if I wanted to forecast or if I wanted to work in industry or work for the military or something like that. And then I found out about this field of study called air-sea interactions, where you can study how the weather and ocean interact with each other. And I got this nice romantic notion that I could sit on a beach somewhere with a Mai Tai with some wet or something and have my feet in the sand and do that. And it doesn't quite work out like that, but I ended up in Oregon of all places.
I was about to say, yeah.
But it was great. And at that point, it's a very interdisciplinary research area. So getting a graduate degree in oceanography, so learning how the ocean works, was kind of really beneficial for that. And then just kind of the right project came along so my graduate research had to do with using satellites to measure things about air-sea interaction. So I learned quite a bit about like how satellites work and how NASA works and things like that. And, the rest is history.
That's awesome. So you worked on a lot of cool projects at school. What is the thing that kind of led you to what you're doing now? Was there a specific project that you worked on?
Yeah. So actually, when I was started in graduate school, there were these new satellites that had just been launched. So NASA will launch environmental satellites that can measure things about, either ocean temperatures or, actually a wide variety of variables. It's quite amazing. Yeah. And NASA's mission, so you might think, well, why doesn't something like an agency like NOAA do this sort of environmental monitoring and things like that? And it turns out that NASA their mandate is that they will develop new satellite missions that can eventually be transitioned over to operational capabilities. And so at the time, they had this new satellite that could measure the wind on the ocean surface. So basically, the wind makes waves on the, little waves on the surface, and the satellite can measure those waves and then infer what the wind is from those. And it also had a new satellite that measured sea surface temperature, so the temperature of just the surface of the ocean. And it had, some bells and whistles on it. And so those two satellite missions were kind of new and novel. And so I kind of cut my teeth on that in my graduate studies. And so that kind of led me to continuing developing these missions. And so right now I'm involved in a new mission with NASA that can actually now measure ocean surface currents. So from space, which is just...
Yeah, right? Wow.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, and there's just so much information you can get from that. So you kind of think about the middle of the ocean. It's like, if you wanted to see what the wind was in the middle of the ocean, you'd have to like put out like this nice buoy with like the little wind vane on it, in the middle of the ocean. And that's a lot of trouble. And it's like, why does anyone care about the wind in, 3,000 miles away from land? And
right.
So a lot of my work kind of gives some motivation for why that's important for our climate and why that's important for society and why we should invest in that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I have kind of a weird related question for you. And this is a personal question I've had for a while. And a friend of mine have been trying to figure this out. On a recent trip to Hawaii, we were flying, over quite a bit of water and noticing all these like surface patterns. It looks almost like snail trails or whatever. Like, what is that?
Yeah. So it depends exactly where you're at. So it could be a couple things, but if you're kind of lower, if you weren't very high in the air and you're kind of seeing those, it turns out that the wind can actually cause these circulation cells in the ocean that are like a few hundred meters or maybe a kilometer or so, something like a couple football fields in length or something. And that'll form along the direction of the wind. And where the water converges, you'll kind of get all these surfactants in the ocean and little bubbles and foam and things like that kind of form into these rows in what is called a convergence zone. And so that might have been something of what you were seeing. If you're higher up and we're seeing like a bigger field of view, you might have been seeing like the ocean is just filled with eddies, and these swirling masses of water that form naturally from the shearing of ocean currents and things like that. And you'll tend to get these like little convergent zones associated with those eddies that kind of, bring all that foam and surfactants and things together into like straight lines or curved lines or something like that. And it's all kind of a random process. So, if you're trying to make some, trying to like figure out exactly what's going on with like one line or something, it'll be very hard to do. But kind of on average, if you look at a bunch of them, you'll see that on average, that's kind of what happens.
Wow. I mean, yeah. And that's so neat. And man, so we love giving our listeners like a deeper look into career options. And we haven't really discussed a career in research. So you said, you had this idea, you were going to be on a beach, sipping Mai Tai, going, oh, wow, look at that, the weather. And isn't that neat? But so what is the day in a life for you like? Like, what does it actually look like?
Yeah. So the last few years, I kind of almost feel like I'm working two jobs, really, because I have like a research program and advising program. So I have a few graduate students I'm advising, and which is wonderful. It's one of the, kind of really fulfilling parts of my job is to be able to kind of help build somebody else's career and things like that. But then there's also this part of my job with the Oregon Climate Service where I'm doing a lot more outreach and advising on policy decisions or advising state or federal agencies on things related to climate, stuff like that. And then also I get a lot of inquiries from the public about things like that. So a day in the life is a little hectic because sometimes I go from the research side or like trying to fix a computer or, thinking about some really nuanced part of a data analysis thing for a couple hours. And then, maybe I have a media request. Lately, there's been a lot of interest in the drought conditions in Oregon. And then also in last summer, there was the heat dome. Sometimes we get these isolated flooding events or wildfires are also a big thing too. And so there are things to do with that. We also generate, as part of our mandate for the Oregon Climate Services that we also produce reports like the Oregon's state climate assessments every 2 years. And so that basically tries to give a summary of recent research and trends and how of the state of the climate in Oregon, how it's changing, what kind of changes we can expect in the future, and then what kind of impacts that we can expect onto society and to natural systems as well. And so, so the day in the life is kind of,
yeah, it's all of it. It's everything.
Yeah. So it's quite exciting. A lot of times, overwhelming sometimes, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the heat dome a couple of times. And so now I think one of our favorite parts of the show is that Laura and I are both infinitely curious. I need to know. So how did that relate to how does the heat dome, which in my mind, again, doesn't relate to the ocean so much. How did that happen? And how are you the expert there talking about heat domes?
Yeah. So the heat dome, I mean, one of the most interesting things about the heat dome, at least to me, was that it happened in a time of year in June where we basically never had heat waves. We almost never had a 100-degree day in Oregon in June. I mean, we had a few, but not hardly very many. And then also the fact that it was just so hot, just blew the records out. It wasn't just a couple degrees. I mean, it was like, Portland was 116, Salem was 112.
Yeah.
So incredibly. And then if you actually dug a little bit deeper, so the heat dome itself was actually nothing more than a high pressure ridge that's set up off our coast. And it was very similar to other types of heat waves that we have in the Pacific Northwest. So it was kind of a similar pattern. It was just so much stronger than any other events that we had seen before. So one of the things that made it so interesting was, we didn't know why, and we still don't know really why it was so strong. And, part of the reason the heat dome was so intense as far as the heat goes is there's a bit about climate change. So just the, climate is warming, but there's also this question that also comes up in other types of extreme weather events, be it tornadoes or hurricanes or, extreme rainstorms or wind events, is that our mid-latitude jet stream is changing a lot. So, we suspect it's changing a lot, but we haven't really been able to pin down some of the details on why that is or how it is. And so one of the really interesting things about the heat dome was that, it was just such a manifestation that, yes, something is changing. We just don't quite know what it is yet. And, it might be linked to the changing Arctic. So ice is melting the Arctic, it's exposing the ocean, as that ocean is now affecting the atmosphere. So that's kind of where the air-sea interaction part comes into this. And there's reason to suspect there's a reason to suspect that those changes are radically altering our jet stream patterns. And so the jet stream is just this kind of strong wind currents that kind of bend up and down around high and low pressure systems. And so when we have low pressure systems and we have storms, and we have high pressure systems, we tend to have fairer weather and potentially very hot weather too. This is why this is all kind of important.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that your enthusiasm about it too, because it's a big project, it's a big event, and it's complicated.
Yeah,
you're still trying to get to the bottom of what it means. And so, do you have other projects like that you're working on that you consider pretty exciting and that you're trying to dive into, just like that?
Yeah. So right now, I'm working with a couple of the students I'm advising, and we're actually looking at some of these air-sea interaction problems in the North Pacific. So basically, how the temperature of the ocean, how that varies in time, and then how the energy is exchanged, that heat and moisture is exchanged from the ocean to the atmosphere. And then what happens downstream? Is there some sort of feedback effect where the ocean can affect the weather, and then that can feed back onto the ocean temperature or something? And one thing that in the last 10 or 15 years that seems to be occurring more often is we're getting these, you might have heard the blob before, the colloquialism for, and it, kind of more formally, they're called marine heat waves. And essentially we just get these big, very large patches of warm water, very, very warm water in the North Pacific. And there's a question about, how it's affecting our weather patterns, or if it's affecting our precipitation patterns. And then it also has a demonstrated effect on the ecosystem in the North Pacific. So fisheries are very affected by whether this warm patch is in the ocean or if it's not. So it affects the phytoplankton in the ocean, and then it goes all down through the food web. So until we get to kind of the fisheries, the stuff that we use commercially. And it turns out that when this warm patch is there, the ecosystem completely changes, and so the type of fish, the amount, the yields that you get from fisheries changes a lot. So it has a kind of big societal interest, at least, to that. And it's not just concentrated to the people who live right near the ocean, but it also affects, a lot of other things too. And so that's one project we're working on, is to understand how these marine heat waves form and then how they dissipate. And so we've had some really good studies with that. It's looking, and we can use satellites to do that, which is just amazing. And other types of weather data, stuff like that. So that's one project. The second one is I recently went out to sea off of the coast of California as part of this NASA-sponsored project to look at the effects of ocean currents on the climate, essentially, and how variations in ocean currents on very small scales, like on the order of like a mile or two in the coastal ocean, can affect, the temperature structure of the ocean, can affect the biology of the ocean, fisheries, things like that. And then how all that's, my specific part in that project is to figure out how these ocean currents are affecting the weather or the atmosphere above it. And so I launched a whole bunch of radio sound balloons, which is quite exciting.
Oh, neat.
The hardest part of that was actually, believe it or not, is not getting all the equipment together, getting a sampling plan, all that. It was just tying the balloon because my fingers and the balloon, you have to kind of tie it. So I launched like 100 of these balloons and my fingers were just raw from,
Yeah. Because like one or two, no big deal, but 100.
Yes, 100 of them. And I was launching like every 15
Where are
minutes.
those students of yours?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah. I did actually have a student that was better at tying the balloons, but she couldn't because of COVID and because the ship we were on didn't have enough berthing space for more people. So she couldn't come. But I wouldn't want to actually burden a student with like something simple like that. I would want them to actually do some, more exciting science stuff.
Right.
That's nice.
I'd probably still end up
That is nice.
anyway.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So your website says that you're working on a project that's working on characterizing the divergence variability from scatterometer observations.
Scatterometer.
Is that
Barometer. Yeah.
Barometer? Yeah. What? I don't know what that is. What is that? Is that one of those projects or is that another project?
Yeah. So that one's not a very exciting project. There's nothing I can say that would probably be of interest to the normal person for that. But I'll try to give like a little.
Not all our listeners are normal. We're all here.
Yeah, that's true. We're all
jobs, so they need to know what these things are.
So that project, I was working with the colleagues at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and so one of the things that's really important for environmental monitoring is having these long data records. So you go out and measure data on stuff. And in this stuff, in this case, was wind over the ocean. And a scatterometer was the satellite mission that I was telling you about that would measure the winds on the ocean surface by measuring how wavy it is. And so we've had a couple different satellite missions now. And this project had to do with looking at the differences between the different satellites to see if we have a homogeneous data record. And this is important because if we want to assess what impacts on the weather that the changing climate is having, for instance, we need to have like a very homogeneous data record across multiple observing missions. And so this project was trying to essentially take all these different data sets and intercalibrate them together. And one of the things of doing that is looking at spatial changes of winds over small spatial scales. And so that's basically the divergence and vorticity are fancy words for changes in wind over spatial scales. And it turns out that there's a lot of information that can be gained from that to learn how storms form or how motions in the atmosphere like thunderstorms and things can create like outflow events and stuff like that. And it turns out that there's quite a bit of differences between different satellite data sets in this. And so it's a challenging project, and it gets quite into the details and weeds and things. And so I'll try to leave you out of that. But
no, I think it's great. This is science. Like,
no, it's cool.
It's making science work.
Yeah, but the divergent vorticity are really related to, they're related to precipitation events. So it's kind of how wind can help create precipitation and things like that, not only over the ocean, but also in storms that come onto land and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny though, because like we talked earlier a little bit about the social impact of what you're doing, right? How some of what you do is related to fisheries, which impacts everyone. And you're also asked to be an expert, and you have to talk about all of these things and put them in bite-sized pieces for people, which can be really challenging. So how do you manage to do that? And do you find it difficult to convey the social side of what you're doing to other people?
Yeah, this is a great question. It is challenging to be able to do that. One of the most challenging things. So it's fairly straightforward if there's a scientific consensus on why something happens. So if, for instance, there's a lot of consensus about why the temperature is changing, why climate change is happening. And so that is easier to convey because it's it's not a simple story, but it's one you can kind of, not worry about too much about getting the science wrong in that as you're communicating. The real challenge is when there isn't necessarily consensus on some issue or why something's happening. So why are we in the third year of drought right now? We don't quite know. We know climate change is part of it, but there are different ideas about why we're going through such severe drought the last 10 or 20 years. That's one example that I can give. So kind of just the nuts and bolts of trying to distill a story down that people can kind of, people have like fairly short attention spans on things that they aren't like truly interested in. So I've done a lot of science communication type stuff. So one of the things, the Compass Science Communication, they have a program and they do these message boxes. And so I actually do a lot of them. So I have stacks of message boxes that I do before interviews when I know what the topic will be, so that the worst thing to do is to kind of get in front of a bunch of people and not have a story and just kind of comment on. And you see that a lot from people. And so the thing is there has to be a little bit of legwork beforehand. So science communication is about kind of effort and legwork, knowing your audience, knowing your key messages, being able to have a key message for a 15-second time slot, 30 seconds, have an elevator pitch. And it sounds kind of corny a little bit maybe to do that, but operationally, or in practice, those are the things that kind of, I think, can help really make you an effective science communicator. So those are the things I kind of work on quite a bit. And, it always takes practice, and you always kind of make mistakes, or, occasionally you do end up doing an interview where you just kind of fumble through something and it's terrible, but,
Right.
And then sometimes you do. Like last summer was really crazy around the time we had the Heat Dome event, because I did, maybe 50, 75 interviews or so over a whole week period. And some of those were just, some of the questions were stuff that you didn't necessarily message box or anticipate or whatever, or necessarily have the best thing on, but you were like, you're on live TV. So
right.
say something.
Right. My name is Larry. So, yeah, right. So
there's a reason we don't do this live.
Yeah, no, I know. But so how does it feel to be really popular when things are going horribly wrong?
I don't necessarily think it's really popular, but it is. There's an intense responsibility because you're in the moment. You're the person in the moment that's trying to get the message out that is to a receptive audience. So you have one chance. It's like being the championship basketball game, and fourth quarter, and if you make the shot, you win. If you don't make it, you lose. And so there's an intense responsibility to get the right message. So being correct about the science, but then distilling it down to a message that people can understand. So not going on and doing a lot of gibberish, talking about things like divergence vorticity and stuff like that. But just and doing that, and then really focusing on like the important things, the impacts. Why should we care about this thing, or what is the important stuff? And that is really challenging. It's stuff that you could do an interview, you can do okay, but then afterwards you're thinking, oh, I should have talked about impact of heat, intense heat on workers, or vulnerable population. There are things that you wish you would have said, but you only have maybe 40 seconds to make your story.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it ends up being a really intense responsibility. And I'm not sure how I ended up in this. I never thought I would. But, there are often times when you get put in a position, there's just a situation just comes up and you're just that person that's there. And so you have to kind of step up and do the thing that you need to do. And so that's a little bit of it. And, you don't have to do it perfectly, but you just kind of have to do it adequately or something. You want to do it perfect, but maybe excellence is better than
yes. Yes, exactly. That's very well said. So you spend a lot of time on the ocean. So I have to ask, have you ever been shipwrecked? Has that ever happened?
I guess it's how you define shipwrecked. So this cruise that we just went on, and it was in October of this year. It was supposed to be a 3-week or something cruise, and we were between 50 and 150 miles off of San Francisco, and it was on the Oceanus, which is an OSU ship that so this was going to be its second to last cruise as we retired, and it was going to be replaced. And so the Oceanus, great, is seaworthy and all that. Get out there, And we had this big atmospheric river event come in. So atmospheric river event is like a big storm, big rainy storm. And it was very windy. And the first night we had this like 30-foot wave wash over the back of the ship. And we had these very expensive instruments that we were going to deploy that was critical to the experiment that we were doing. The wave washed over the ship and just wrecked, $500,000 worth of instruments. It destroyed them. And so we were going to have to go back into port anyway. But as we were getting close, so we started from Newport, going down to San Francisco. So the instruments are all kind of ruined. And then turns out that we were leaking hydraulic fluid that they didn't know where. And it was to the propulsion system. And so basically when the fluid was gone, we were dead. So we had to go into San Francisco anyway. And so we get in there. So it was like 100 gallons of hydraulic fluid that they don't know where it went, if it leaked in the ocean or whatever. But we had to get tugged into San Francisco Bay. So we went under the Golden Gate Bridge, and that was quite exciting to go under the Golden Gate Bridge. I'd never done that before. But we were in a tug, being pulled by a tugboat. So it wasn't, that exciting. And we get into San Francisco, and it was late at night, and they pulled us into the wrong berth for the draft of the ship. So the tide went out, the ship ran aground and smashed up the bottom of the ship. And so we thought the ship would have to go into dry dock, which was basically going to be the end of our cruise. And so the captain was like, screw COVID protocols, just, go off and enjoy San Francisco for a few days. And fortunately, they found the leak. It was small. Fortunately, there wasn't that much damage to the end of the hull of the ship. And a couple of people from San Diego who, were whose instruments got smashed, they were able to come up here and fix them, kind of help them do that. And so actually after 5 days, we were back out at sea, and we deployed, 3 of the 4 instruments. One of them was just too badly destroyed. And the ship was great. And I launched lots of balloons, and and then, part of the ship, part of the field experiment was that there were aircraft tests with instruments, and there were sail drones, there were other drifting buoys and stuff. So it was part of a big thing. So we were a really critical part of that. And so it was really a bummer if the ship couldn't have gone out.
Right. Right.
We have been calling that segment our field notes, and we've considered changing it to field fails. And I,
yeah. That's exactly it.
I think you may be top runner for that right now.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
It had a happy ending, so at least.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, all good ones should, really,
Yeah, I don't necessarily like being out at sea, especially for like 3 weeks. It kind of, the ship gets small, and it's even though the food's great and the crew's great and all your colleagues are really good. So it was actually kind of nice to actually get a couple of days out in San Francisco. You can go and get like a coffee and run to the store and get a part or something if you need it. And so it was good.
Nice. That's okay. I know when I'm in a really nice place, after about 2 weeks, I'm ready to jump back home.
Yeah.
So not normally, the majority of the people we talk to, they fall underneath the avenue of a career path that's been very exploratory. I thought I was going to do this, and then I went to do that. And yours seems very, you had a passion, you followed it, and it's led you to be that expert that people call upon when something's happening, which is pretty cool. What's left? What's on your career bucket list?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Aside from going underneath the Golden Gate Bridge without the tugboat.
Yeah.
I would really like to go to Antarctica someday, or the Southern Ocean. So part of my thesis research was, I did a lot of stuff in the Southern Ocean, which is kind of the part of the ocean that's north of Antarctica and goes all around it. And so someday, although as I get older, you have to go out to sea for like 6 to 12 weeks, or sometimes you have to really make a big commitment for that. And the older I get, the more that starts to sound maybe not so appealing.
Right.
And everything would be great. But it would be nice to go see that, especially maybe in 50 years, it'll look quite a bit different.
Yeah.
So kind of see a penguin or something like that. I still wouldn't mind putting instruments out on a beach and drinking Mai Tais. That would So, being involved kind of with satellite missions, it takes a long time to get a satellite up and to start using the data. So it can take 10 to 20 years. And so basically being a kind of a research scientist using satellite data is oftentimes you're left like waiting a decade or something for measurements you really want to use. And you spend a lot of time telling everyone how great these measurements are going to be and how much better the world's going to be and stuff. Yeah. And so sometimes it's kind of, you're waiting to do that. You're waiting for the new instruments and just kind of doing the hard work, beforehand to do that. But, it was very strange. I never thought I would, I was just asked to be the state climatologist because of interests in other areas. So I never thought I would do that. I never thought I would be talking about impactful events or working on some of this kind of stuff. So, it was kind of serendipity a bit that I was, I was available to do something at the time it was needed. So yeah, serendipity. I think that's the word for it.
That's a good one.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end of our time, but we like to ask our guests about their hobbies and things like that. And I'm particularly drawn to yours. I thought it was pretty funny, but I need you to tell us the full story, including a detailed description of your outfit.
Oh, yes. So this isn't necessarily a current hobby now, but when I was in grad school, 15 years ago or something, this is also kind of something that was a little bit serendipity too. I was, I decided, I'll learn how to dance or something. So OSU has Oregon State University has lots of dance classes and stuff. So it's like, okay, I'll go do that. And, it was okay. It was fun. It's fun. But there was this, OSU had this performance dance group, and somebody who I was in a dance class with, she's like, oh, you're pretty good. You should try out for it. So I did. I said, okay, you're okay. And so I was part of this performance dance group for 2 years, and which was actually fun, but it was a little bit intense because there's lots of practice, and you go to all these dance classes and stuff like that. So it was a little bit more than I was hoping for at the time, but it ended up being really fun because we'd go do these things at dance clubs and stuff in Portland and Seattle and Eugene and old folks' homes, strange like that. And so so we had all these dance routines, swing and some hip hop, some waltzes, all those sort of things. And the thing about dance, if you ever watch Dance with the Stars, they're always wearing these really flashy, extravagant costumes. I don't know why they do that.
Right.
I just want to wear t-shirt and jeans to dance. But you have these things with glitter and poof stuff. So we end up with outfits like that, like bright green or something. And it was it was really awesome time, especially when you're younger. You make a lot of friends with all your fellow dancers in the dance group, and you meet a lot of people and see a lot of things. So it was a really cool experience. And I ended up, as I kind of got a postdoc and grew older, I didn't do it as much, but for a little bit of time I was a good dancer.
That's awesome. That sounds really fun.
I go to a dance and people they say, oh, there's a West Coast swing coming up in 2 songs, and I want to dance with you, kind of thing. You're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. But now I'm really hoping there's some social media posts with these dance moves you have somewhere.
Oh, no. This is before social media. Thank God.
Too bad.
Yeah. It's good.
That's great.
Yeah. So, so we are just about out of time, and it's been a lot of fun. We've learned a lot, and we had some laughs, which always is that means we did a great job, right? It's been a really fun interview. So before we let you go, is there anything you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
I don't think so. Not, I could keep talking, but I think this is great. Yeah.
Before you go, where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So you can always email me at my Oregon State address if you have questions, or especially about the climate or anything research-wise. So I'm actually on Twitter, and I don't necessarily post very much. So I'm at my name, Larry O'Neill. And I also do a lot of posts through the Oregon Climate Service. We have our own Twitter account that's more related to climate-related things. And I leave the snarky stuff to my personal Twitter account. But Oregon Climate Service, you can get great information on climate. We post a lot of things on weather and climate variability and things to do with impacts and just, all that sort of sciencey stuff. So either way is a good way to get a hold of me, because I usually check those pretty often.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. We had a great time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much.
And that's our show. I want to thank Larry so much for being on the show today. We had a lot of fun. It was really cool to hear so much about climate science. It was really neat. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.